They told
Is
Serafina
everything to your
Russo she
liking
was
this
nothing.
evening?
A
Yes,
waitress,
my dear, everything
trash
is
from
perfect.
Queens, a
Wonderful.
girl
Enjoy
whose
your
poverty
evening.
could be smelled from across the room, like cheap perfume mixed with desperation. They told her to stay in the shadows where she belonged, scrubbing toilets and cleaning up after people who wouldn't look her in the eye. But on December 18th, 2025, at exactly 11:58 at night, Serafina spoke 7 words in a language that had been dead for 80 years. 7 words that made a 300-year-old vampire king stop breathing. 7 words that shattered the carefully constructed wall between the living and the undead. And the karma. The karma was brutal. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back. Back to the moment before everything changed. Back to when Serafina Russo was still invisible. The rain in Manhattan didn't wash away anything. It just made the neon lights reflect harder off the pavement, blinding you to the misery hiding in every corner. Serafina stood in the bathroom of Il Sogno, the most pretentious Italian restaurant on the Upper East Side, staring at her reflection in the smudged mirror. She looked exhausted. 24 years old, and she looked like she'd lived 40. Her hazel eyes, usually bright despite everything, were dulled by 14-hour shifts and the crushing weight of numbers she couldn't escape. $87,340.52. That's what her mother's life cost, according to the hospital billing department. That's what stood between Maria Russo and survival. Serafina adjusted the collar of her uniform. Third hand didn't fit right, the fabric scratchy against skin rubbed raw from too many shifts and not enough sleep. On her phone's cracked screen, her wallpaper showed a certificate. Columbia University Master's Program in Linguistics Year 2. Withdrawn spring 2023. She'd been 3 months away from finishing when her mother collapsed during dialysis. 3 months away from Dr. Serafina Russo, specialist in dead languages and forgotten dialects. Now she was just Sarah. The girl who scrubbed toilets at Il Sogno. The girl nobody noticed. The bathroom door slammed open. Serafina jumped, her heart lurching into her throat. Cormac Thorne filled the doorway, his face flushed red, his cheap suit straining across a body that spent more time at the bar than the gym. Floor manager, petty tyrant, the kind of man who compensated for his complete lack of personality by terrorizing anyone he perceived as weaker. He'd been making Serafina's life hell for 2 years. Ever since she'd rejected his clumsy advance behind the dumpster during a smoke break, she didn't even smoke during. She just needed air. 5 minutes of air. Cormac stepped inside. The door swung shut behind him. The lock didn't work. Everyone knew the lock didn't work. That's why the women at Il Sogno never came here alone during shifts. But Serafina had thought everyone was in the pre-service meeting. She'd thought wrong. Working hard, Russo? His voice was a sneer wrapped in false friendliness. Or hardly working? Serafina kept her eyes down. Conflict with Cormac meant fewer shifts. Fewer shifts meant her mother missed dialysis. Her mother missing dialysis meant no. She couldn't think about that. Just finishing up, Mr. Thorne, heading to the floor now. Not so fast. He moved closer. The bathroom suddenly felt very small. I know you need money, Russo. I know your mom's dialysis is Thursday. $2,400 a session, right? I see the collection calls on your emergency contact form. Serafina's hands clenched into fists. Her emergency contact form was confidential. He'd gone through her employee file, violated her privacy to find ammunition. I manage my finances, she said quietly. Do you? Cormac leaned against the sink, blocking her exit. Because I'm looking at a girl who's desperate. A girl who'd do almost anything for the right opportunity. Be nice to me, Russo. I'll give you the morning shifts. Weekend doubles. You could make an extra 1,000 a week easy. The implication hung in the air like rotting meat. Serafina lifted her chin, met his eyes. She was poor. She was desperate. She was drowning in debt that would follow her to the grave. But she wasn't that desperate. I'd rather scrub toilets than let you touch me. Cormac's face went from red to purple. The false friendliness evaporated like steam off hot asphalt. Pure, ugly rage took its place. Then enjoy poverty, Russo. Enjoy bathroom duty. Forever. In fact, I'm taking you off the floor entirely tonight. VIP section needs to stay clean, and you... He looked her up and down with contempt. You make the place look cheap. He shouldered past her, slamming the door so hard the mirror rattled. Serafina released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cold porcelain sink, forcing herself to breathe slowly. In, out, in, out. She couldn't afford to lose this job, but she couldn't afford to keep it either. Not like this, not with Cormac escalating, pushing, waiting for her to break. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket with numb fingers. Final notice? Payment required immediately. Account sent to collections if payment not received by December 19th. Tomorrow. Serafina closed her eyes, pressed her forehead against the cool mirror, and for just a moment, just one moment, she let herself imagine what it would be like to walk out, to leave this restaurant, this city, this crushing weight of responsibility, and just disappear. But then she thought of her mother, Maria Russo, who'd worked 3 jobs to put Serafina through undergrad. Maria, who'd never once complained, never once made her daughter feel like a burden, even when they were eating rice and beans for the 4th night in a row, because that's all they could afford. Number Serafina wouldn't disappear. Russo women didn't run. Her Nonna Rosa had taught her that. Right before she died, she'd gripped Serafina's hand with surprising strength and whispered in the dialect of the old country, the dialect of Matera of the ancient hills of Basilicata. Siamo Russo, non ci pieghiamo. We are Russo, we do not bend. Serafina straightened, splashed cold water on her face, adjusted her uniform one more time. She would survive tonight, just like she'd survived every other night. She had to. The kitchen at El Sonio was chaos wrapped in expensive copper pots. Pierre Dubois, the head chef, was screaming in French about truffle oil. His sous chefs moved like dancers in a ballet of knives and fire their faces tight with concentration and fear. Pierre had a reputation for throwing things when displeased. Last week, a sauté pan had missed a line cook's head by inches. Serafina slipped through the chaos toward the service station. Cormac was already there gathering the servers for the pre-VIP briefing. Serafina hung back trying to be invisible. It was a skill she'd perfected over 2 years. Be invisible. Don't make eye contact. Don't give them a reason to notice you. But Cormac noticed everything when it came to her. Listen up. He clapped his hands, his voice cutting through the kitchen noise. The servers gathered around him. 6 women, 2 men, all dressed in the same black uniforms, all wearing the same expression of carefully controlled anxiety. Il Sogno wasn't just a restaurant, it was a battlefield. And Cormac was the general who enjoyed watching his soldiers bleed. We have a very important reservation tonight, 11:45. The Moretti family. The reaction was immediate. Someone gasped. One of the newer servers, a girl who'd only been there 3 weeks, went pale. Even Pierre stopped yelling in the kitchen. Everyone knew the name Moretti. Moretti Construction had built half the skyscrapers in Manhattan. Moretti Holdings owned 3 shipping lines, 4 luxury hotels, and more real estate than God. They'd been one of the most powerful families in New York since the Gilded Age, their wealth old and dark and unquestionable. But that wasn't why people were afraid. People whispered other things about the Morettis. Strange things, impossible things, that they never aged, that people who crossed them disappeared and not in the move to Jersey kind of way. That they only came out at night, and when they did, the temperature dropped and shadows moved in ways shadows shouldn't move. Superstition, obviously. Rich people always attracted weird rumors. Probably started by tabloids desperate for clicks. But still, the fear in the room was real. Cormac puffed out his chest, enjoying the power of being the bearer of important news. Dante Moretti is coming with his mother, Signora Vittoria. Everything must be perfect, and I mean perfect. If anyone messes this up, I will personally ensure you never work in this city again. His eyes scanned the line of terrified faces, stopped on Isolde Vane. Isolde was 26, blonde, beautiful in a sharp, calculated way. She'd been at Il Sogno for 4 years, longer than anyone except Pierre. She was also one of the cruelest people Serafina had ever met. Isolde had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, the subtle sabotage, the smile that cut like glass. Isolde, Cormac said, pointing at her with a thick finger. You take the table. You have the look they like. Classy. Isolde smirked. She shot a triumphant glance at Serafina, her blue eyes glittering with malice. Don't worry, Cormac. I know how to handle high-value men. Then Cormac turned to Serafina. His smile was vicious. And you, Russo, stay away from Section A. You're on bathroom duty and bussing tables in the back. I don't want your poverty stinking up the Moretti experience. Serafina bit her lips so hard she tasted copper. Don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction. Understood, she said quietly. Cormac's smile widened. He'd won. Again. The servers dispersed. Isolde brushed past Serafina, her shoulder bumping hard enough to hurt. Try not to break anything tonight, she murmured sweetly. Oh, wait, you already broke yourself, didn't you? Dropping out of school because mommy got sick. How tragic. Serafina said nothing. She'd learned long ago that responding to Isolde only made things worse. The woman fed on conflict like a vampire fed on blood. Vampire. There was that word again. Serafina shook her head, grabbed a bus tub, and headed to the back section. The section no one wanted. The tables hidden behind structural columns where they seated the walk-ins and the tourists who didn't know better. She had 45 minutes before the Morettis arrived, 45 minutes to stay invisible. 11:58, the exact moment when December 18th began to bleed into December 19th. The moment when everything changed. Serafina was wiping down a table in the shadows of the back section when she felt it. A shift in the air, a change in pressure like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant swung open. Not pushed, not pulled, just opened. By themselves. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Serafina's breath fogged in front of her face. Around her, she heard the clink of silverware stopping mid-bite. Conversations died mid-sentence. The ambient jazz music seemed to falter, the piano notes hanging in the air like suspended raindrops. And then he walked in. Dante Moretti. Serafina had seen pictures in the society pages, blurry paparazzi shots that never quite captured his face. But no photograph could have prepared her for the reality. He was tall, at least 6'3", maybe more. Broad-shouldered in a way that made the bespoke black suit look like it had been carved directly onto his body. But it was his coloring that made her breath catch. His skin was alabaster. Not pale alabaster, like marble, like something ancient, imperfect, and utterly inhuman. His hair was black as a raven's wing, pushed back from a face that could have been sculpted by Michelangelo, if Michelangelo had been trying to capture the concept of beautiful danger. But it was his eyes that made something deep in Serafina's hindbrain scream danger. They were black, not dark brown, not deep hazel. Black, pitch black, void black, the kind of black that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. No visible distinction between iris and pupil, just endless darkness. On his arm walked a tiny woman who moved like an empress. Signora Vittoria Moretti couldn't have been more than 5'1". She looked around 75, dressed entirely in mourning black, a delicate lace veil over silver hair. She carried a silver-topped cane, but she didn't lean on it. She wielded it like a scepter. The entire restaurant held its breath. Serafina felt it in her bones. That primal instinctive recognition that prey feels when an apex predator enters the territory. Every diner in El Sonio had frozen caught in some biological imperative, older than language. Run, her hindbrain whispered. Run now. But Serafina didn't run. She watched. And she noticed something everyone else seemed to miss. The way Dante's hand rested gently on his mother's elbow. The way he matched his pace to hers, patient, protective. The way his expression, cold and distant, to everyone else softened just slightly when he looked at her. He wasn't a monster. He was a son trying to please his mother. Dorian Sterling, the owner of Il Sogno, materialized from nowhere. He bowed so low his bald head nearly touched his knees. It was embarrassing to watch. Mr. Moretti, he stammered, his voice high and nervous. Such an honor. We have your table ready, of course. Our very best. Right this way, sir. May I take your coat? Can I get you? Dante didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, just guided his mother through the silent restaurant with the kind of presence that made people instinctively step back, clearing a path. As they passed Serafina's section, Signora Vittoria paused. She turned her head, sniffing the air slightly, her dark eyes scanning the shadows. For a split second, her gaze locked directly on Serafina. Serafina looked down immediately, clutching her cleaning rag like a lifeline. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Mother? Dante's voice was deep, a baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Nothing, figlio mio, the old woman murmured. Just a scent of something. Old. They continued to their table. Section A, the best table in the house, positioned by the window overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. Isolde was already there, her professional smile plastered on her posture, perfect. Serafina released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The nightmare was about to begin. The service was a disaster from the start. Isolde hovered over the table like a vulture in designer heels. She poured the wine with an elaborate flourish, her movements theatrical, drawing attention to the low cut of her uniform. She laughed too loudly at nothing. She leaned in too close to Dante, her hand brushing his arm, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a seductive purr. Dante looked bored. He stared out the window, swirling his wine, a vintage red that looked disturbingly thick in the glass, almost black, and said nothing. But the real problem was Signora Vittoria. She pushed her risotto away after a single bite. The sound of the plate scraping across the table cut through the restaurant's carefully maintained ambiance. Garbage, she spat. Her voice was raspy, harsh, loud enough to carry. It tastes like plastic and ego. The restaurant went silent. Again. Isolde's smile faltered in a crack, appearing in her perfect facade. Is something wrong, Signora? Isolde's voice was strained. That's our chef's signature dish. White truffles flown in from Piedmont this morning. Plastic, the old woman interrupted. I want water, no ice, and wine that tastes like earth, not this garbage of cities. Isolde scrambled. Cormac appeared from nowhere, his face flushed, gesturing frantically at Pierre through the kitchen window. The chef was already screaming, his face red, throwing a whisk that clattered against the stainless steel counter. Serafina watched from the shadows of her section. She could see what they couldn't. Signora Vittoria wasn't just being difficult. She was in pain. The way she held her jaw tight and clenched. The slight tremor in her hand when she reached for her water glass. She was uncomfortable, perhaps ill, and she was lonely in a way that made Serafina's chest ache. Dante was there physically, but his mind seemed centuries away. He looked like a man going through motions he'd perfected over lifetimes. Present, but not engaged. Breathing, but not alive. 10 minutes passed. The tension in the restaurant grew thick enough to choke on. Then disaster struck. Isolde, flustered by the old woman's glare, and Cormac's increasingly frantic hand signals, reached across the table to refill the wine glasses. Her sleeve caught the edge of Vittoria's cane, which was resting against the table's edge. Clatter. The heavy silver-topped cane hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. The bang echoed through Il Sogno, making several diners jump. You clumsy fool! Cormac's voice was a hiss as he rushed forward from his position near the bar. I'm so sorry, Signora. Isolde froze, her face pale. I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry. Let me. Signora Vittoria looked at the cane on the floor, then at Isolde. Her expression was one of complete disdain, the kind of look a queen might give to a peasant who dared to breathe her air. She didn't move to pick it up. In her world, queens did not bend to retrieve dropped items. Dante's eyes flashed with irritation. He moved to stand, his jaw tight. But before he could, a shadow moved swiftly across the floor. Serafina didn't think, didn't calculate the risk, didn't consider that Cormac had explicitly told her to stay away from this table. She just acted. She slipped past Cormac, moved into the light of Section A, and knelt gracefully beside the table. The cane was cold to the touch, heavier than it should be, like it was made of lead instead of wood and silver. As she lifted it, she felt the weight of history in her hands. This wasn't just a mobility aid. It was an heirloom, a symbol. Serafina rose slowly, holding the cane out with both hands, her head bowed respectfully. She didn't look at Dante. Every instinct screamed not to meet his eyes. Instead, she looked at the mother. Here, Signora, she said softly. Cormac's hand clamped on her bicep like a vice. His fingers dug in hard enough to leave bruises. Serafina gasped, nearly dropping the cane. What the hell are you doing here, Russo? His voice was low, venomous. I told you to stay in the back. Get away from this table right now. He turned to Dante, his face transforming into a grotesque parody of a smile. Mr. Moretti, I apologize deeply, profusely. This is one of our lower-level staff. She's not trained for VIP service. She'll be leaving immediately. He yanked Serafina hard. She stumbled, pain shooting through her arm. Let her go. 2 words, just 2 words, but they hit Cormac like a physical blow. His hand released Serafina's arm instantly, his fingers springing open as if he'd touched an electric fence. The voice belonged to Dante Moretti. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had a quality that made something deep in the human nervous system respond with immediate obedience. Cormac took a step back, his face confused, frightened. Dante looked at Serafina, really looked at her. He took in the frayed uniform that didn't fit properly, the dark circles under hazel eyes that had once been bright, the hands chapped from bleach water and harsh soap, the dignity in her posture despite the humiliation. For the first time all evening, Dante Moretti focused on something other than the window. Signora Vittoria, however, was staring at Serafina's hands, at the way she held the cane. You handle that cane like a sword, girl, not a stick. Serafina looked up, met the old woman's eyes. They were dark, so dark, but there was something in them. A spark of recognition, of interest. My nonna used to say, a cane holds the weight of a life, Signora. It deserves respect. Vittoria's eyes narrowed. She leaned forward slightly, and then she muttered something under her breath, low, fast, in a language that made Serafina's heart stop. Not Italian, not the Italian taught in schools or spoken in Rome or Florence. The dialect of Basilicata, of Matera, of the ancient hill towns where Serafina's Nonna Rosa had been born almost 90 years ago. A dialect that had mostly died out in the early 1900s, kept alive only by stubborn old women who refused to let the modern world erase their history. Idioti, circondati sempre da idioti. Voglio solo un bicchiere di vero sangue non questa spazzatura di città. Idiots, always surrounded by idiots. I just want a glass of true blood, not this city garbage. In the old country, true blood was a metaphor. It meant strong homemade wine, the kind that stained your teeth and warmed you from the inside. The kind made from grapes that remembered the earth. Serafina's mouth opened before her brain could stop it. The words flowed off her tongue like water, like muscle memory, like her Nonna Rosa's voice speaking through her across the 5 years since her death. Il vero sangue è difficile da trovare in una città di acqua sporca, signora, ma forse la cucina ha vino che ricorda la terra. True blood is hard to find in a city of dirty water, madame, but perhaps the kitchen has wine that remembers the earth. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Isolde's jaw dropped. Cormac looked like he was having a stroke, his face cycling through shades of red and purple. Dorian Sterling, watching from near the bar, grabbed the edge of the counter to steady himself. Dante Moretti stiffened. For the first time all night, his cold, distant demeanor cracked. His pupils dilated, swallowing the black iris entirely until his eyes looked like twin voids. He looked from his mother to the waitress in the frayed uniform and back again. Signora Vittoria's face went blank. Then slowly, so slowly, a smile spread across her weathered features. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was the smile of someone who'd just found something they'd been searching for a very, very long time. You speak the tongue of the old hills. Her voice trembled. Actually trembled. Serafina's throat was dry. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to escape. My Nonna Rosa was from Matera, Signora. She taught me before she passed. 5 years ago. Matera, Vittoria breathed. She looked at her son with an expression Serafina couldn't decipher. Joy, fear, something ancient and complicated. Lorenzo, she whispered, using a name that wasn't quite right, like it was an old name, a private name. Did you hear? I heard Mama. Dante's voice was no longer bored. It was intense. Focused entirely on Serafina with a kind of attention that made her feel like a butterfly pinned to a board. I heard. Cormac, sensing he was losing control of the situation and too stupid to read the room, stepped forward again. His face was mottled with rage and humiliation. I'm so sorry if she offended you with her gibberish, Mr. Moretti. Serafina, get to the kitchen. You're fired. Pack your things and go. Right now. Fired, the word came from Dante. He turned his head slowly toward Cormac. The temperature in the restaurant dropped another 10 degrees. The wine in the glasses seemed to shiver. You are firing her. Each word was enunciated with deadly precision. Yes, sir, immediately. Cormac stammered, completely misreading the situation, thinking he was agreeing with the billionaire. She's unrefined. She interrupted your dinner. She is the only person in this room who has made my mother smile in 50 years. Dante stood, slowly, deliberately. He towered over Cormac, who suddenly looked very small and very afraid. If she leaves, we leave. And if we leave, I will buy this building tomorrow morning just to evict you personally. Do you understand me, Mr. Thorne? Cormac went pale, opened his mouth, closed it, looked like a fish drowning in air. Dante turned back to Serafina. He extended a hand. On his finger was a ring with a crest older than New York City itself. What is your name? His voice had softened, but the intensity remained. Serafina, she whispered. Her voice barely worked. Serafina Russo. Serafina. He tested the name like he was tasting wine, like he was memorizing the shape of it in his mouth. My mother wishes for wine that remembers the earth. Do you know where to find such a thing in this establishment? Serafina nodded. The adrenaline coursing through her veins had burned away the fear, replacing it with something else, something that felt almost like power. The reserve cellar, bottom shelf back left. There's a dusty bottle of 82 Barolo that Pierre hides for himself. It's the closest thing to home in this place. Dante's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but was devastating nonetheless. It transformed his face from coldly beautiful to dangerously handsome, the kind of handsome that made empires fall and sensible women do stupid things. Go get it, Serafina, he said softly. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation. And bring 3 glasses. You will drink with us. The descent into Il Sogno's wine cellar felt like stepping into a different century. The air was thick, cool, heavy with the smell of damp earth and aging oak. Stone floors older than the building above. Wooden racks towering like ancient bookshelves lined with bottles worth more than Serafina's entire student loan debt. Her sensible work shoes secondhand, the sole coming loose on the left, tapped softly against the stone as she navigated the labyrinth. Her heart still hammered from what had just happened upstairs. The impossible conversation in a dead language. The way Dante Moretti had defended her. The way he'd looked at her. Like she mattered. Like she was visible. She found Pierre's hiding spot exactly where she remembered. The head chef thought he was clever concealing his personal stash behind a crate of overpriced Prosecco. But Serafina had worked here for 2 years. She noticed things. The invisible always did. The 82 Barolo was there. The label was stained, the wax seal slightly chipped. But when Serafina lifted it, she felt the weight of history in her hands. This bottle had been waiting. Waiting for tonight. Waiting for her. "You think you're clever, don't you, trash?" Serafina spun, nearly dropping the bottle. Cormac stood at the end of the aisle, backlit by the cellar's dim lighting. His face was a mask of rage, twisted and ugly. The humiliation upstairs had broken something in him. "Cormac, I'm just getting the wine Mr. Moretti asked for." "Mr. Moretti," he mocked, his voice high and vicious. "You think because you mumbled some peasant gibberish to his senile mother that you're special? You're nothing, Russo. Nothing. A poverino from Queens drowning in debt that will follow you to your grave." He stepped closer. The cellar suddenly felt very small. "I know about your mother's bills. I see the collection calls on your emergency contact form. I know you're desperate. I know you're breaking." Serafina's hands tightened on the bottle. "Get out of my way, Cormac." "Let them wait," he snarled. He lunged forward, grabbed her wrist. His fingers dug in painfully, finding the bruises he'd already left. "Give me the bottle." "No, Pierre will kill you if—" "Pierre won't know. Moretti won't know." He wrenched her wrist hard enough to make her gasp. With his other hand, he grabbed a bottle of cheap cooking wine from a nearby utility shelf. "Here's the plan, Russo. I take this Barolo. I sell it for $2,000 and pocket the money. You bring them this swill. When that old witch spits it out and demands you be fired, Moretti won't save you twice." His face was inches from hers now. She could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. "You're trash, and by tomorrow morning everyone will remember it." "Give it to me." He twisted her wrist. Serafina cried out, her grip on the Barolo loosening. "Give it to me, or I smash it right here and tell them you dropped it because you showed up drunk." The air in the cellar changed. It didn't just get colder. It became devoid of heat entirely. Like all warmth had been sucked out of the universe, leaving only the cold of deep space, of absolute zero, of the void between stars. The shadows in the corner of the aisle deepened, coalesced, became solid. Cormac froze. He didn't see it yet, but he felt it. That primal animal fear that silenced his rage instantly. The lady said no. The voice didn't echo. It seemed to originate directly beside their ears, a velvet whisper wrapped around a razor blade. Dante Moretti materialized from the shadows. He hadn't walked down the aisle. He simply appeared, stepping out of darkness, like darkness was a door he could open at will. Cormac released Serafina as if she'd turned to red-hot iron. He stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of empty wine crates with a deafening crash. Dante didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on Serafina, scanning her face with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. His gaze dropped to her wrist, to the red marks where Cormac's fingers had dug in. His jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. "Did he hurt you?" It was terrifyingly calm. A doctor asking about symptoms. A general asking about casualties. No emotion in the words, but the absence of emotion was more frightening than rage would have been. Serafina shook her head. She couldn't speak. Couldn't think. The presence of Dante Moretti in this confined space was overwhelming. He smelled like cold rain and expensive leather, and something else, something metallic and sharp like blood on a copper coin. Dante finally turned his attention to Cormac. The manager was pressed against a wine rack, whimpering softly, his face the color of old cheese. "You are a small, petty little man," Dante said. He didn't raise his voice, yet it sounded like thunder in the confined space, like the moment before lightning strikes. "If you ever touch what is mine again, you will not only lose your job, you will lose the ability to use that hand." "What is mine?" The phrase echoed in Serafina's head. "Go," Dante commanded. Cormac fled, scrambled up the stone stairs like a rat escaping a flooded sewer, his expensive shoes slipping on the damp steps. Dante turned back to Serafina. The menacing aura retracted slightly, replaced by something else. Something that looked almost like concern. He reached out and gently took the Barolo from her shaking hands. His fingers brushed hers. They were cold. Not cool, not room temperature. Cold, like marble in winter. like touching something that had never known warmth, would never know warmth, had been cold since before warmth was invented. "Come, Serafina," he said softly. His eyes held hers, black meeting, hazel void meeting light. "My mother is waiting for her wine, and I am waiting to learn who you really are." Walking back into the dining room felt surreal. The warm lighting, the clink of silverware, the low murmur of conversation, it all felt like a stage set now. A performance. The reality was the cold man walking beside her and the terror she'd just experienced in the cellar. Cormac was nowhere to be seen. Probably fled out the back exit, clutching his dignity and his job security, both of which were hanging by threads thinner than spider silk. Isolde stood near the kitchen door, pale and tight-lipped. Her blue eyes tracked Serafina with the kind of hatred usually reserved for mortal enemies. The golden girl of Il Sogno had just watched a nobody waitress steal her spotlight, and the rage was palpable. But Serafina barely noticed. Her entire world had narrowed to the weight of the Barolo in her hands and the impossible man beside her. Signora Vittoria looked up as they approached. Her eyes lit with genuine joy when she saw Serafina completely ignoring her own son. Ah, the girl of the hills returns, and she brought the treasure. Serafina fell back into her training, though her hands shook slightly as she presented the bottle. The ritual of service, the familiar choreography that had been beaten into her over 2 years of double shifts and demanding customers. But she didn't have a corkscrew. "Allow me." Dante held out his hand, not a request, an inevitability. Serafina handed him the bottle, watched as he examined it for a moment, turning it in the dim light. Then he did something that made her breath catch. He didn't ask for a tool. He simply placed his thumb against the wax seal and pressed. With impossibly precise strength, he drove his thumb straight through the rose in the aged cork beneath it. The sound was soft like a knife sliding through butter. He pulled the cork out in one clean, silent motion. It was a feat of finger strength that should have been impossible for a human being. The cork was old, dense, sealed with wax. It should have required a professional corkscrew and considerable effort. Dante did it like he was opening a letter. Serafina grabbed 3 glasses from the service station, her mind racing. She'd watched him do it. Watched his thumb penetrate aged cork like it was made of foam. Watched the way he moved, economical and precise, like every action had been perfected over centuries of practice. Centuries. She pushed the thought away, focused on the familiar. Poured a small amount in for Signora Vittoria to taste the way she'd been trained. The old woman swirled the dark crimson liquid, brought it to her nose, inhaled deeply. Her eyes closed and an expression of such profound relief washed over her face that Serafina felt like she was intruding on something intimate. "Terra," Vittoria whispered. "It smells of damp earth and shadows. It smells of home before the fires." She nodded and Serafina poured a full glass, then one for Dante. Finally feeling absurd and out of place, she poured one for herself. She was standing in her stained uniform holding a $50 glass of wine and at a table that cost more to reserve than she made in a month. "Sit." Vittoria's command was soft but absolute. She tapped the empty chair beside her with renewed energy, as if the promise of proper wine had revitalized her. Serafina hesitated, looked at Dante. He nodded. Pulled the chair for her with old-world courtesy that felt both natural and utterly surreal. The restaurant stopped moving. Conversations didn't just pause, they died. Every eye in Il Sogno turned to watch the lowly waitress sit at the table of kings. Vittoria raised her glass. "To memories." Dante lifted his black eyes fixed on Serafina with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "To the blood of the earth." They drank. The wine was exquisite, complex and velvety with notes of cherries and something darker, more savory. It tasted like it had been bottled by hands that understood wine was more than fermented grapes. It was history, memory, the earth itself captured in glass. But as Serafina watched them drink, a chill crawled up her spine. They didn't drink like people enjoying wine. They drank like starving people given soup, like desert travelers finding water. Vittoria drained half her glass in one long pull, and a sigh of profound relief escaped her lips. The sound was almost obscene in its satisfaction. Dante took a sip, but he didn't seem to taste it. He was tolerating it for his mother's sake, going through motions while his attention remained locked on Serafina. He set his glass down, leaned forward. His voice dropped so only the 3 of them could hear. "Tell me, little linguist, where did a girl from Queens learn a dialect that hasn't been spoken widely since the Risorgimento?" Little linguist. The phrase made something in Serafina's chest ache. He'd noticed. Somehow he'd looked at her and seen not a waitress, but what she'd almost been. what she'd given up. My Nonna Rosa, she said, feeling hypnotized by those pitch-black eyes. She raised me. My parents died when I was 7. Car accident on the BQE. After that, it was just Nonna and me in her apartment in Astoria. She could still see it. The tiny kitchen that always smelled like garlic and tomato sauce. The crocheted doilies on every surface. The photograph of Matera on the wall. The ancient sassy houses carved into limestone cliffs, looking like a city built by artists who'd learned their craft from God. She refused to speak English in the house, Serafina continued. Said English was a language for commerce, for getting by in the world. But our dialect, the dialect of Matera of Basilicata, that was a language for the soul. Vittoria let out a cackle that made nearby tables jump. It was the sound of pure, unexpected joy. She was a wise woman. What was her name? Elena Rosa Russo. The laughter stopped. Stopped so abruptly it was like someone had cut the power to a speaker mid-song. Vittoria froze her glass halfway to her mouth. She slowly, so slowly turned to look at her son. And Serafina saw something pass between them. A silent communication so fast and frantic it was like watching lightning arc between 2 points. Russo, Vittoria whispered. The name came out like a prayer, like a curse, like both at once. From Matera. Did she ever speak of the cave's child, the shadowed places beneath the city? Serafina felt the weight of the question. The way it hung in the air, heavy with meaning she couldn't quite grasp. Sometimes. She told me scary stories when I was little. Stories to keep me from wandering off when we visited her hometown the summer I turned 10. Stories about the Upiri. The word left her mouth before she could stop it. Upiri, an ancient word, a southern Italian term for the creatures that lived in darkness. The undead, the revenants who fed on the living and walked through centuries like mortals, walked through rooms. Vampires. Dante went completely still. Not the stillness of a person holding their breath. The stillness of something that didn't need to breathe. His chest didn't move. His eyes didn't blink. For 3 full seconds, he was a statue carved from pale marble, beautiful and terrible, and utterly inhuman. Serafina looked at him. Really looked. And all the pieces that had been scattered across the evening suddenly slammed together with terrifying clarity. The icy skin she'd felt in the cellar. The impossible strength with the cork. The way he'd appeared from shadows like shadows were doors. The way the staff was terrified, not the normal fear of the rich and powerful, but something deeper, older, more instinctive. The way Vittoria talked about true blood with a hunger that wasn't metaphorical. The family that had been powerful in New York since the 1890s, but never seemed to age. The Upiri. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her hands started to tremble. Wine sloshed in her glass. She started to push her chair back. An overwhelming urge to run, to flee, to get as far away as possible from this table and these creatures and this impossible truth. Dante's hand shot across the table, clamped onto her forearm, not painfully, but immovably, like being held by a stone statue. And his skin, God, his skin was so cold it burned ice against her pulse point. Don't run, Serafina. His voice was low, compelling, vibrating with something that made her head swim. It wasn't quite compulsion, more like gravity, like he'd become the center of her universe, and running would mean flying off into space. Please, don't run. You, her voice came out as a whisper. What are you? Signora Vittoria leaned in close. Close enough that Serafina could see the fine lines around her eyes, the silver strands in her hair. Close enough to see the way the milky film over her eyes cleared for just a moment, revealing something sharp and predatory beneath. We are the history you forgot, little Russo. Vittoria's smile was terrifying and beautiful. And it seems you just walked right into the lion's den. Serafina's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird throwing itself against cage bars. She was sitting at a table with 2 apex predators. Creatures that shouldn't exist. Monsters from her grandmother's scary stories made flesh, and sitting in a Michelin-starred restaurant drinking wine that suddenly seemed a lot less metaphorical. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But Dante's hand on her arm wasn't restraining her with force. It was grounding her, a tether keeping her from flying apart. And there was something in his eyes, something almost like fear, that made her pause. We are not going to hurt you, Serafina. His voice was steady, calm, but she could hear the thread of urgency beneath it. If we wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't have made it down the stairs to the cellar. You wouldn't have made it through the dining room. You wouldn't have woken up this morning. Vittoria reached across the table. Her withered hand, liver-spotted and trembling, slightly covered Serafina's free hand. The skin was parchment, dry cold as Dante's, but somehow gentler. like old paper, like something ancient but carefully preserved. "We are Moretti," she said. Each word was enunciated clearly, as if speaking to a child who needed to understand something vitally important. "And you, child, are Russo. Do you know what your Nona did during the war? In 1943? Serafina shook her head. She couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up, trapped between terror and a curiosity so fierce it almost hurt. Vittoria's eyes went distant, unfocused, like she was looking not at the restaurant, but through it into the past. Matera 1943. The Germans were occupying southern Italy. They were searching for resistance fighters, for Jews, for anyone who'd oppose the Reich. But they were also searching for us. You, Serafina's voice was barely audible. The Moretti family had lived in Matera since the Middle Ages. We had crypts in the Sassi, in the ancient caves beneath the city. We thought we were safe. We'd survived the Inquisition, the plague, the wars of unification. We thought we could survive the Nazis. Vittoria's hand tightened on Serafina's. But the Germans found us. A local fascist, hoping to curry favor, told them where we slept during the day. They came at noon when the sun was highest, when we were at our weakest. They dragged our sleeping bodies from the crypts. 5 of us. Me, Dante, his father, 2 others. Serafina could see it, the harsh Mediterranean sun, the limestone caves that had protected the Moretti family for centuries, violated by men in jackboots. Bodies that looked dead but weren't, limp and heavy, being pulled into the light. "They were going to burn us," Dante said. His voice was soft but carried the weight of memory. "Soak us in petrol and set us ablaze while we slept. The sun would have finished what the fire started." "And then," Serafina whispered. Vittoria smiled. It was sad and beautiful and full of a grief that had been carried for 80 years. "And then a 16-year-old girl with fire in her eyes and her grandfather's shotgun told the Nazis we were her family's religious relics. Told them we were mummified saints protected by the church, and if they touched us, there would be hell to pay." The image formed in Serafina's mind. A young woman, practically a child, standing between the German army and 5 sleeping vampires, the kind of courage that bordered on insanity. "The Nazis didn't believe her at first," Dante said, "but she was convincing, and she had that shotgun, and she looked them in the eyes and didn't blink. She dragged us," Vittoria continued, her voice thick with emotion, "dragged our bodies, impossibly heavy like marble statues, into her family's olive cellar. Sat on the steps with that shotgun across her knees. When the Germans came to search her house, she told them to get out. A 16-year-old girl ordering Nazi soldiers around like they were children, tracking mud on her clean floor." "And they left?" Serafina asked. "They left," Dante confirmed. "I woke at sunset in darkness. Couldn't remember where I was at first. Then I heard her, sitting on those cellar steps, exhausted, still holding the shotgun. Her hands were shaking. She'd been there for 6 hours, not moving, not sleeping, just waiting. I asked her why," Vittoria said. "Why risk her life for monsters, for creatures she'd been taught to fear?" "What did she say?" Vittoria's eyes glistened with tears. "She said, because you were sleeping. Nobody deserves to burn while they sleep." The silence that followed was profound. Serafina felt something crack open in her chest. That was her Nonna. That was exactly something Elena Rosa Russo would have said. Would have done. The woman who'd taken in a 7-year-old orphan without hesitation. Who'd worked 2 jobs to keep them fed. Who'd taught Serafina that the world was often cruel, but that was no excuse not to be kind. "We owed her a life debt," Dante said. His thumb stroked the inside of Serafina's wrist, a gesture so gentle it made her want to croon. "The kind of debt that can never be repaid. But she vanished, came to America after the war, and hid herself, changed her records. We've been searching for the Russo bloodline for 80 years. He leaned closer. The smell of him was intoxicating despite everything: cold rain and expensive cologne, and something wild underneath, something that reminded Serafina of winter forests and ancient stone. "And now I find her granddaughter," he murmured, "serving bad wine, treated like garbage, in a place that doesn't deserve her." Serafina's mind was reeling. "I don't want your debt," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. Firmer. "I don't want repayment for something my grandmother did when I wasn't even born. I just want to pay my mother's medical bills. I just want to survive." Dante's expression darkened, not with anger, with something else, something that looked like determination mixed with possession. "The bills are gone," he said. "Consider them paid as of this moment. You can't just—" "I can." His voice was absolute. "But it's not just about debt, Serafina." He looked at his mother. Vittoria was grinning now, her face transformed from dignified matriarch to something almost mischievous. He likes you, girl, she cackled. He hasn't looked at a woman like that since 1920. You have fire. You stood up for me when that blonde harlot treated me like a senile nuisance. You have the Russo spine. Before Serafina could process this, before she could even begin to wrap her mind around the idea that a billionaire vampire king apparently had a crush on her, the double doors of the restaurant banged open. Cormac marched in, but he wasn't alone. Two uniformed NYPD officers flanked him. And behind them, looking like he was on the verge of a heart attack, was Dorian Sterling, the owner of Il Sogno. There, Cormac shouted, his voice cracked with vindictive triumph. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Serafina. That's her. That's the thief. She's drinking the stolen inventory right now. The entire restaurant fell silent, again. The society diners who'd been pretending not to watch the drama at table one now turned openly, forks frozen midway to mouths, champagne flutes paused in midair. This was better than theater. This was real. The officers approached, their hands resting cautiously on their belts. One was older, maybe 50, with gray in his mustache and tired eyes. The other was younger, nervous, his hand hovering near his taser. Ma'am, the older officer said, his voice professionally neutral, step away from the table, hands behind your back. Dorian Sterling stepped forward, wiping sweat from his bald head with a monogrammed handkerchief. Officers, please. That bottle she's drinking is a 1982 Barolo from our reserve cellar. It retails for $5,000. It's stolen property. Isolde appeared from the kitchen doorway, her face a mask of false concern. I saw her sneak down to the cellar, she said, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. I told her to stop. I tried to tell her it was against policy, but she laughed at me. She said she deserved a drink. Liar, the word exploded from Serafina before she could stop it. She stood her chair, scraping against the floor. That's a lie, Isolde. You know that's a lie. Save it for the precinct, sweetheart. Cormac's voice was thick with satisfaction. He walked right up to the table, his eyes gleaming with malice. You thought you could embarrass me. Thought you could act like a princess because you know a few Italian words. You're trash, Russo. And now you're trash with a criminal record. The younger officer pulled handcuffs from his belt. The metal gleamed under the restaurant's carefully designed lighting. Ma'am, please. Hands behind your back. No, Serafina pleaded, looking from the officer to Sterling, to Dante. Please, I didn't steal it. The gentleman, Mr. Moretti, he asked for it. He invited me to drink with them. Dorian squinted at Dante as if seeing him for the first time. Mr. Moretti, Cormac laughed. It was an ugly sound full of spite. This man isn't going to save you. He's probably just another mark you're trying to scam with your sob story. Don't worry, sir. He turned to Dante with a sycophantic smile. We'll remove this problem so you can enjoy your evening. We'll comp your meal for the disturbance. He reached out. His sweaty, eager hand grabbed Serafina's upper arm, fingers digging into flesh, intending to yank her physically away from the table, to maximize the humiliation, to make sure everyone saw. Come on, let's go. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud, like a dry oak branch snapping in a winter storm, like a gunshot in a library. Cormac didn't scream immediately. His brain couldn't process the speed of what had just happened. One moment his hand was on Serafina's arm. The next moment, Dante Moretti was standing. Except he hadn't stood up. Not in the way humans stand. He'd moved with a velocity that blurred the air around him, that left after images on the retina. He'd intercepted Cormac's wrist mid-grab and twisted. The geometric violence was precise, effortless, terrible. Cormac's wrist bent at an angle that defied anatomy. 87 degrees, bone-pierced skin, blood welled up dark against white shirt cuffs. Now he screamed. It tore through Il Sogno like a siren, ragged and animal. He dropped to his knees, cradling his ruined arm against his chest. The entire restaurant gasped. Several women screamed. Someone dropped a wine glass and it shattered, the sound lost in the chaos. Police, back up. The younger officer drew his taser, his hands shaking. Sir, step away from the victim. Hands in the air now. Dante did not put his hands in the air. He didn't even look at the police. He looked down at Cormac with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining an insect. Then he spoke, and his voice was soft, but it carried through the room like thunder before lightning. I warned you. I told you in the cellar. If you touch what is mine again, you will lose the use of that hand. He adjusted his cuffs, the movement languid, elegant. You are a slow learner, Mr. Thorne. Sir, the older officer's voice was sharp now, adrenaline overriding procedure. Get on the ground. On the ground now, Dante slowly turned his head to face the officers. His eyes caught the light of the chandelier. For 1 second, one fraction of a second, they flashed deep predatory crimson, like looking into the eyes of a wolf. Like looking into the abyss and having it look back with hunger. The temperature in El Sonio dropped 20 degrees. The lights flickered. A primal wave of dread, heavy and suffocating, rolled over every person in the room. The officers froze. Their fingers trembled on their weapons. They wanted to fire. Every part of their training said to fire. But something deeper, older, more fundamental was screaming at them that pulling that trigger would be the last mistake they'd ever make. Dante's eyes returned to their normal endless black. But the message had been delivered. "You speak of theft," he said, his voice silk over steel. "You accuse this woman of stealing." Dorian Sterling swallowed hard. "She took the bottle without authorization. It's inventory. It wasn't ordered through our point of sale system." "Is that all?" Dante reached into his jacket. The officers tensed, but he didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out a card. It wasn't plastic. It was a slab of matte black titanium, unbranded, heavy. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a thud like a gavel striking a block. "Mr. Sterling," Dante's voice was conversational now, almost pleasant. "Do you know who I am?" Sterling looked at the card, then at Dante's face. The structure of his jaw, the signet ring, the way he carried himself with the absolute certainty of someone who'd never been told no in 3 centuries. The color drained from Sterling's face until he looked like a vampire himself. "Moretti," he whispered. "Dante Moretti." "Correct. Now tell me, Mr. Sterling, how much is this establishment worth? And please don't bore me with the valuation of a single bottle of wine. I mean everything. The lease, the brand, the furniture, the staff contracts, the building itself." "We're not for sale, Mr. Moretti. Il Sogno is a heritage location. We've been here for—" "Everything," Dante interrupted, "is for sale. The only question is price. Is $10 million enough?" The room went silent. Even Cormac stopped whimpering. Sterling's mouth opened and closed. "10 million, Mr. Moretti. The restaurant is worth perhaps 4 million on a very good day." "I am never anything but serious." Dante pulled out his phone. Sleek black, probably cost more than a used car. "I'm wiring $15 million to your holding company right now. 5 million extra for the inconvenience of having to listen to your voice." He tapped the screen 3 times. "Done." Sterling's pocket buzzed. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, stared at the screen. His eyes bulged so wide they looked like they might fall out of his skull. The notification was there. The zeros were there. $15 million had just appeared in his account like magic. "The money," Sterling's voice was barely audible. "It's there." "Good." Dante's smile was cold, beautiful, absolutely terrifying. "Now get out of my restaurant." "What?" "You sold it. It is no longer yours. Leave. Take your officers with you. They have no jurisdiction on private property unless a crime is being committed. And drinking one's own wine is not a crime." The officers looked at each other, looked at Sterling. Sterling nodded frantically, his face the color of old milk. He bought it. It's his property. We have to go." They holstered their weapons, helped Cormac to his feet. He was still cradling his wrist, tears and sweat streaming down his face, his expensive shirt ruined with blood and humiliation. As they turned to leave, Dante turned his back on them, dismissed them like they were nothing, less than nothing. He looked at Serafina, the terrified waitress who was trembling, staring at the man who'd just spent $15 million like buying a newspaper. His face softened. The predator receded. The gentleman emerged. He took her hand, the one Cormac had tried to grab, and inspected it gently for bruises. His cold fingers were surprisingly tender. "The debt is paid, Serafina," he murmured, but the insult needed to be corrected. Then he turned her to face the room. Cormac was being dragged toward the exit, whimpering. Isolde was pressed against the wall, her face pale, looking like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. Dante's voice carried to every corner of Il Sogno. "I am a silent investor. I have no interest in managing the day-to-day operations of a restaurant." He paused, looked at Serafina. "Serafina Russo is now the owner and sole proprietor of this establishment." Serafina's jaw dropped. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. "Dante, I can't." "You can," he said firmly. "And as the owner, you have your first order of business." He gestured to Cormac and Isolde. "What do you want to do with the trash?" Serafina looked at Cormac Thorne. This man had made her life hell for 2 years, had stolen her tips, had made her beg for shifts so she could pay for her mother's dialysis, had cornered her in bathrooms and cellars, had called her poverino and trash and nothing, had just tried to send her to prison because she wouldn't sleep with him. She looked at Isolde Vane, the woman who'd sabotaged her tables, stolen her pens, laughed when customers made her cry, who'd just lied to police to see her arrested. Serafina took a deep breath, straightened her spine, felt the weight of her grandmother's legacy, the Russo blood that had stood against Nazis with nothing but a shotgun and courage. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She channeled the cold, regal authority of Signora Vittoria Moretti. Cormac. Her voice was soft, clear. It rang through the restaurant like a bell. He looked up, sweat and tears streaming down his face. Serafina, please. My wrist. I need a hospital. Help me. You're fired, and you're banned. If you ever step foot in this building, or any building owned by the Moretti Corporation, you will be removed by force. She turned to Isolde. You too, Isolde. Pack your locker. Leave your uniform. Go. But I didn't do anything. Isolde's voice was shrill, playing the victim to the bitter end. Cormac made me lie. I need this job. You needed kindness more, Serafina said quietly. But you didn't have any. Get out. She looked at the officers. Please escort these trespassers off the premises. They're disturbing my customers. The police led them out. Cormac's screams faded as he was taken to an ambulance. Isolde went silently, her face a mask of impotent rage, and the dining room erupted. Not in whispers, in applause. The chefs were clapping from the kitchen window. The busboys were cheering. Even the wealthy patrons, sensing that justice had been served and the entertainment was over, offered polite applause. Serafina stood in the center of it all, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. Dante stepped close, whispered in her ear, "Well done, Mia Regina, my queen." 3 months had passed since the night Serafina Russo's life split in two. The 30 days the council had initially given her became 60, then 90, as Augustus Constantine acknowledged the unprecedented nature of her case. Immortal under debt protection had never before been offered the third option. The council needed time to debate, to set precedents, to ensure this wouldn't become a loophole every vampire's human lover could exploit. Serafina had used every extra day to avoid the inevitable, to run Il Sogno, to video call her recovering mother, to learn vampire history from Vittoria, and fall deeper in love with a man who didn't breathe. But tonight the extensions ran out. The winter solstice gala waited for no one. 3 months had passed since the night Serafina Russo's life split in two. 3 months since she'd spoken 7 words in a dead language and woken a vampire king from a century of numbness. 3 months since Dante Moretti had bought a restaurant just to fire the man who'd hurt her. 3 months since she'd learned that monsters were real and one of them had claimed her as his reason to feel alive. And tonight the council would demand her answer. Death, turning, or the unprecedented third option, stay human, marry into the family, and live out her mortal years under Moretti protection while Dante watched her age and die. 30 days they'd given her, 30 days to choose her future, and she'd used every single one of them to avoid making the choice. But the winter solstice gala waited for no one. Serafina stood before the floor-length mirror in the master suite of the Moretti estate, her reflection a stranger. The crimson velvet gown clung to her like a second skin, the color of spilled wine and fresh blood. Strapless, daring. The kind of dress that said, "I belong here," even when every cell in her body whispered, "You're still the girl who scrubbed toilets 3 months ago." The diamond choker at her throat caught the light with every breath. Dante's gift. Beautiful and weighted with meaning she was still learning to decode. Behind her, reflected in the mirror, Signora Vittoria sat in the armchair by the fireplace. The old vampire looked stronger than she had that first night. Her skin had more color. Her eyes were clearer. The crystal flute in her hand held something dark and red that Serafina had learned not to ask about. "You're afraid." It wasn't a question. Serafina's hand stilled on the choker clasp. "I'm terrified." "Good." Vittoria's smile was sharp. "Fear keeps you sharp, but don't let them smell it. The women downstairs are predators, Piccolina. They've been waiting 3 months to see if the little waitress will crack under pressure. I know how to handle mean girls, Signora. I worked in high-end hospitality for 5 years. These aren't mean girls." Vittoria set down her flute and rose, moving with the grace of something that had perfected movement over 5 centuries. She crossed to Serafina, her ancient hands adjusting the gown's drape with practiced precision. "These are apex predators in designer heels. They will smile while they gut you. They will compliment your dress while mentally cataloging every way you don't belong." She met Serafina's eyes in the mirror. "But you are Russo. Your grandmother stared down Nazi soldiers with a shotgun. You can handle a ballroom full of socialites. My grandmother knew what she was fighting for. Serafina's voice came out smaller than she intended. I still don't know what I'm choosing. Vittoria's expression softened, just slightly. Then perhaps tonight will clarify things? A knock at the door. Serafina, Dante's voice muffled by heavy wood. May I come in? Yes. The door opened. And Serafina forgot how to breathe. Dante Moretti in a tuxedo was a work of art. Black on black on black, the fabric so perfectly tailored, it looked painted onto his marble-pale skin. His dark hair was pushed back, exposing the sharp architecture of his face. But it was his eyes that held her, those endless black voids that had learned to soften when they looked at her. He stopped in the doorway, went completely still in that way only vampires could, like someone had pressed pause on reality. You look, he trailed off, seemed unable to finish the sentence. Terrified, Serafina offered. Magnificent. He crossed the room in 3 strides, took her hands. His skin was cold as always, but she'd learned that his touch brought a different kind of warmth. You look like a queen, Serafina. My queen. I'm not a queen. I'm a linguistics dropout in a borrowed dress about to face a room full of people who want me dead. Not all of them want you dead. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Some just want you humiliated. It's an important distinction. Despite everything, Serafina laughed. It came out shaky but real. Dante pulled her closer, close enough that she could smell the expensive cologne that didn't quite mask the underlying scent of old stone and winter. Listen to me. You don't have to go down there. I can tell the council you're ill. We can delay this another month. And then another month after that, and another, Serafina shook her head. No, I've been hiding long enough. It's time to face this. Then know this. His voice drop became the rumble that made her feel safe and terrified in equal measure. Whatever you choose tonight, death turning or mortality, I will accept it. I will not push. I will not guilt you. Your life is your own, Serafina, even if it destroys me to lose you. The weight of that settled over her like snow, heavy and cold and impossible to shake off. What if I don't know, she whispered. What if I get down there and still can't decide? Then we dance until you do. He offered his arm. Shall we? The grand staircase of the Moretti estate descended into a ballroom that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that beauty and terror were 2 sides of the same coin. Crystal chandeliers dripped light like frozen stars. The marble floor was polished to a mirror shine. And everywhere were beautiful people in expensive clothes, moving through the space with the practiced grace of apex predators pretending to be human. When Serafina appeared at the top of the stairs with Dante, the music stopped. Not slowed, not paused. Stopped. Every head turned, every conversation died. 200 pairs of eyes, some human, most not fixed on the girl in the crimson dress. The whispers started like a wave. That's her. The waitress. She doesn't belong here. I give it an hour before she runs. Look at her hands. You can still see the scars from dishwashing. Dante's hand tightened on hers. She felt the rage vibrating through him, contained but barely. One wrong word and he'd level this entire ballroom. Easy, she murmured, squeezing back. Let them talk. Words only have the power we give them. They're insulting you. They're afraid of me. There's a difference. That made him pause. Look at her with something like surprise. You're not wrong. They descended slowly, every step deliberate. Serafina kept her chin up and her spine straight, channeling every ounce of Russo stubbornness her grandmother had bred into her. At the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, clearing a path, creating a gauntlet. And waiting at the end, positioned in front of the massive fireplace, were 5 figures who radiated power the way the sun radiated heat. The council. Serafina recognized the setup immediately. This wasn't a gala. This was a trial. And she was the defendant. The center figure stepped forward, a man who looked 40 but moved like he'd seen empires rise and fall, silver threaded through dark hair, eyes the color of old gold. He wore his authority like a second skin. Dante, his voice carried across the silent ballroom. You bring your pet to council gathering. How? Bold. Augustus. Dante's reply was ice-wrapped in velvet. Serafina Russo is not my pet. She is under Moretti protection by blood debt. I suggest you choose your words more carefully. Augustus's smile was the smile of a shark. Of course. Forgive my imprecision. He turned those gold eyes on Serafina. Miss Russo, welcome. We've heard so much about you. None of it good, I imagine. That surprised him, just for a second. Then the shark smile widened. On the contrary, we've heard you're intelligent, educated, that you speak languages most humans have forgotten. He circled her slowly, a predator evaluating prey. We've heard you knew nothing of our world until 3 months ago, and yet here you stand in the heart of vampire society, wearing Moretti colors and Moretti diamonds. He stopped in front of her, leaned in close enough that she could see the inhuman stillness in his chest. No breath, no heartbeat, just ancient hunger wearing a civilized mask. The question, Miss Russo, is whether you're brave or simply suicidal. Does it matter? Serafina met his eyes, didn't blink. Either way, I'm still here. The ballroom rippled with something that might have been approval, or might have been anticipation of violence. Augustus laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass. Oh, Dante, she has spine. I see why you've claimed her. He stepped back, gestured broadly. Very well. The council recognizes Serafina Russo. You have until midnight to present your choice. Until then, his smile turned cruel. Enjoy the party. The music started again. A waltz. Old-fashioned and formal, and designed to showcase who belonged and who didn't. Couples filled the dance floor, moving with inhuman grace, floating rather than stepping. Dance with me. Dante pulled Serafina into his arms before she could protest. It's the only way to have a private conversation in a room full of vampires with supernatural hearing. He swept her into the waltz. And despite everything, despite the fear and the pressure, and the knowledge that her future was being decided tonight, Serafina felt herself relax into his lead. Dante was a good dancer. Of course he was. He'd had 300 years to practice. The council's testing you, he murmured against her ear. Every person who approaches tonight will be an evaluation. How you handle them determines whether they vote for your death or your protection. So no pressure. Immense pressure. But I believe in you. He spun her, brought her back close. First rule, don't show weakness. Second rule, don't show too much strength. They'll see it as a threat. Third rule, when in doubt, be yourself. It's gotten you this far. Being myself got me cornered in a wine cellar by my abusive manager. Being yourself got you noticed by a vampire king. His black eyes held hers. Trust me, Serafina. You're stronger than you know. The song ended. Before Serafina could catch her breath, a woman materialized at Dante's elbow. She was stunning in the way only vampires could be. Tall, willowy, with cheekbones that could cut glass and eyes like chips of ice. Her gown was silver expensive and designed to make every other woman in the room feel inadequate. Dante, darling, her voice was silk over razors. You can't monopolize the guest of honor all evening. Introduce us. Dante's jaw tightened. Serafina, this is Morgana Ashford, council representative for the New England territory. Morgana's smile was all teeth, and Dante's former lover. But he's being polite by not mentioning that part. She turned those ice chip eyes on Serafina. Walk with me, dear. Let's have a chat, girl to girl. It wasn't a request. Serafina looked at Dante. He gave the smallest nod. Trust me, his eyes said. Of course. Serafina extracted herself from Dante's arms and fell into step beside Morgana. They walked to the edge of the ballroom, to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds. Far enough from the crowd that their conversation would be private. Close enough that Dante could reach them in seconds if needed. You're probably wondering why I'm talking to you. Morgana didn't look at Serafina, just gazed out at the winter landscape. Everyone else is content to whisper behind your back, but I prefer directness. That makes two of us. Good. Morgana turned and the friendliness evaporated. Then let me be direct. You need to choose death or memory wipe. Tonight, before midnight. Oh, Serafina's stomach dropped. That's not your decision to make. No, but it's my strong recommendation. Morgana leaned in. Do you know what a Canante bond is, Miss Russo? What it really is. Dante's soulmate, his singer, the one who makes him feel alive. That's the romantic version. Morgana's voice went hard. Here's the truth. I was a Canante once. Dante's Canante. In 1923. And when I got scared and couldn't handle the weight of being the only thing standing between him and eternal numbness, do you know what happened to him? Serafina shook her head, though dread was already curling in her stomach. He went mad. For 6 months, he was a monster, even by vampire standards. Killed indiscriminately. Couldn't control his bloodlust. The council had to chain him in silver for 2 years until the bond faded enough that he could function again. Morgana's eyes were cold. And that was after only 6 months with me. He's been with you for 3 months, and the bond is already stronger than what we had. If you choose mortality, if you age and die while he watches, it won't just destroy him. It will destroy everyone around him. The words hit like physical blows. He told me he'd follow me shortly after I died. Is that what he said? Morgana laughed bitter. Oh, sweet girl. He means he'll walk into the sun once you're gone. But he won't do it immediately. He'll spiral first, lose control, become the monster he's spent centuries suppressing. How many innocents do you think he'll kill before he finds the strength to end himself? Serafina's hands were shaking. Why are you telling me this? Because I care about him. Despite everything. Despite the fact that he replaced me the moment he heard you speak that damn dialect. Morgana's mask slipped and underneath was raw pain. If you love him, truly love him, you'll choose memory wipe. Let him go back to the gray. It's kinder than giving him paradise just to rip it away. She turned to leave, then paused. Or choose to turn, become one of us. Then you can have your eternity together, and the rest of us don't have to clean up the bloodbath when you inevitably die. Morgana walked away, leaving Serafina alone by the window, her reflection pale and shaken in the glass. The rest of the gala passed in a blur of tests. A human politician's wife cornered Serafina in the powder room, all fake smiles and sharp questions about her intentions with Dante. Serafina smiled back just as fake and deflected every probe. An ancient vampire asked her about linguistics, clearly testing whether she was actually educated or just playing a role. Serafina responded in fluent Latin, then switched to ancient Greek for good measure. The vampire left looking impressed despite himself. And then there was Catherine Pembroke, the socialite who'd tormented Serafina in her waitress days, who'd tipped 5% and sent back lobster because it looked at her funny, who'd been caught embezzling from her own charity. Catherine approached during the dinner service, her smile venomous. Serafina, or should I call you Miss Russo, now that you're playing dress-up? Serafina set down her wine glass, slowly. Catherine, how's the charity investigation going? I heard the IRS is very thorough. Catherine's smile froze. I don't know what you're talking about. Table 12, 3 months ago, you and Senator Davies arguing about where to hide the money. Serafina's voice was pleasant conversational. I remember because you tipped 5% on a $200 bill. You know what we called customers, like you in the service industry? What? Catherine's voice was tight. Cheap. Serafina picked up her wine glass again. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual friends to talk to. She walked away, leaving Catherine sputtering in fury. And across the ballroom, she saw Dante watching with poorly concealed pride. But underneath the small victories, Morgana's words echoed. If you choose mortality, he'll become a monster. At 11:45, Augustus Constantine stood and rang a crystal bell. The sound cut through conversation like a knife. Ladies and gentlemen, the hour approaches. Miss Russo, if you would join us. The crowd parted again, creating a path to the 5 council members standing in judgment. Serafina walked it alone. Dante wasn't allowed to accompany her for this part. Council law. She stood before them, 5 ancient vampires who'd seen centuries come and go and felt very small, very mortal, very aware that they could end her with a thought. Serafina Russo. Augustus's voice carried formal weight now. You have been given 30 days to choose your fate. The time has come. Before this council and these witnesses, declare your choice. Death, transformation, or mortality under Moretti protection. The ballroom held its breath. Serafina looked at Dante. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his face carefully neutral, but his hands clenched at his sides. He'd told her he'd accept any choice, but she could see the fear in his eyes, the desperate hope. She looked at Vittoria, who watched with ancient wisdom and something like affection. She thought of her mother, healthy and whole in Zurich, finally free of the dialysis chair that had been slowly killing her. She thought of Il Sogno thriving under her management, a place of joy instead of fear. She thought of Morgana's warning, of the monster Dante might become if she chose wrong. And she thought of her Nonna Rosa, 16 years old with a shotgun, staring down Nazi soldiers because nobody deserves to burn while they sleep. What would Nonna choose? Serafina lifted her chin, met Augustus's golden eyes. I choose option 3. Mortality under Moretti protection. The ballroom erupted in whispers, but Serafina continued, her voice cutting through the noise, with one condition. Augustus raised an eyebrow. Mortals do not negotiate with the council. This one does. Serafina's voice was steady, strong. You're afraid Dante will lose control when I die, that he'll become the monster he was after Morgana left. But I'm not Morgana. She turned to address the entire ballroom. I choose mortality because I believe life is meant to be lived, not just endured. I choose it because growing old with someone you love is a gift, not a curse. And I choose it because Dante deserves to remember what it means to be alive, even if that means remembering what it means to grieve. She looked back at the council. But I also promise this. When my time comes, when I'm old and ready to let go, I will do it on my terms. Peacefully. Surrounded by love. I will not leave him in violence or tragedy. I will give him a goodbye he can carry instead of a wound that festers. She paused. And if he does lose control after I'm gone, if he becomes a danger, then Vittoria has my permission to end him quickly. Mercy, not punishment. I will not be the reason innocents die. Silence. Absolute ringing silence. Then Vittoria stood. The girl speaks wisdom beyond her years. I accept her terms. And I vouch for my son. He will not become the monster the council fears. Augustus studied Serafina for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. Very well. The council accepts your choice. Serafina Russo, you are granted mortality under Moretti protection. May you live well and die peacefully. He raised his glass. To the Canante who chose love over eternity. The ballroom echoed the toast. And as the clock struck midnight, Serafina felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She'd made her choice. Now she just had to live with it. Later, after the guests had left and the estate had quieted, Serafina found Dante on the balcony overlooking the Hudson. Snow was falling soft and silent, turning the world into a fairy tale. He didn't turn when she approached, just stared out at the winter landscape like he was trying to memorize it. You're angry. Her voice was small. No. He turned finally and his eyes were wet. I'm grateful and terrified and more in love with you than I thought possible. He pulled her close. You gave me mortality, Serafina. After 300 years of immortality, you reminded me that endings make beginnings meaningful, that death makes life precious. His cold hands cupped her face. I will treasure every moment, every gray hair, every wrinkle, every slow morning, because they mean you lived fully. And when I die, then I'll carry you with me into whatever comes next. He kissed her forehead, and I'll try very hard not to become a monster in the meantime. Serafina laughed through tears. That's all I can ask. They stood there as snow fell, a vampire and his mortal Canante choosing to measure forever in heartbeats instead of centuries. It wasn't the ending anyone expected, but it was theirs. And that, Serafina thought as Dante held her close, was more than enough. 6 months later, Il Sogno was packed again, reservations booked solid for months. Maria Russo sat at table 12, the same table where Catherine Pembroke had once complained about lobster laughing with friends and looking younger than she had in years. Serafina moved through her restaurant with confidence, greeting regulars and training new staff, with the kind of leadership that came from knowing exactly how hard this work could be. When Dante arrived at sunset, slipping into the restaurant just as the last rays of sun faded, Serafina met him with a kiss. Good day, he asked. Better now. She laced her fingers through his cold ones. Ready to go home? Always. As they stepped out into the Manhattan evening, Serafina thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago. The invisible waitress drowning in debt and desperation. That girl was gone, transformed. Not into a vampire, into something perhaps more powerful, someone who knew her worth and refused to let anyone make her small. She'd been told she was nothing. They'd been wrong. And the karma, the beautiful, brutal karma, was that the girl they'd tried to destroy had become exactly who she was meant to be. Not a vampire queen, not immortal, just Serafina Russo, linguist, restaurant owner, daughter, and the mortal woman who'd taught a vampire king that some things were worth dying for. That was magic enough.